beyond visual line of sight applications. So there's countries right now that are testing, trying to understand how to develop regulations in order to ensure and enable beyond visual line of sight applications. And what that basically means is that drones will become autonomous. It means you no longer need a pilot that's going to be looking or standing, perhaps for cinematography applications, yes, but for other applications, you no longer really need to be actively involved in flying the drone. You can sit there, push the button, it does its route, and it comes back. The data is downloaded, and you have something in front of you. So you can see that this has a lot of implications about how we live as a society. It has data, privacy applications or issues. It has flight issues just in terms of space. Do we want drones flying up and down the city? So there's a lot of things happening that regulators need to figure out, insurers need to figure out how to insure, and then companies are trying to make money on as quickly as possible. Just to give you an idea of what's happening, so in Hong Kong, where I'm based, we have a small team that is tracking the industry. And this just gives you an idea. We're tracking roughly 280 drone companies, and this just gives you an idea of what's been happening in this space. 2003 to 2017, we've seen 38 drones enter the space. We've seen 34 drone companies being acquired. We've seen 9 agriculture related, and we'll talk about investments in agriculture in a moment. We've seen drone companies go public, and also some are shutting down. So it's so dynamic because if you don't have the right strategy and understand where the revenue stream is going to come from, providing hardware is one aspect, providing software is another aspect, trying to integrate your service offering is also very challenging. So it's a very dynamic and moving industry. I'm sure you've heard of very many different market sizes. In our research, we have stayed away from trying to estimate the value of the industry just because the number of applications today is constantly changing. 3 years ago, when they talked about applications in agriculture, it was primarily imaging, and then spraying came along. Now you have seeding applications, and so just the number of applications is constantly evolving. How can I say today how much the market's going to be worth when I haven't figured out what the technology can actually do? But anyways, some of the numbers that are being thrown around: 80 billion by 2025, 32.4 a couple years ago. So these are really big numbers globally, and there's a lot of people that are actively involved trying to figure out what it means for their companies. In terms of agriculture, these are investments from private equity and venture capital. So this is really to give you an idea of the amount of money that's flowing in to the industry and how dynamic it is from a drones perspective as well as from a precision agriculture perspective. So it did shoot up from 2013 to 2015, 340%, big number. 2016 it dropped off. 2017 half-year latest numbers are roughly at 2016 numbers, so right now it's about 300 million at half-year 2017, so we'd expect it to come in also roughly around the 2016 numbers. But it gives you an idea of the cycle, so a lot of money poured in, and now the companies are looking for a return on investment. There's been some issues, companies have closed down, but it's still a very dynamic industry in terms of how it's attracting capital, and it's continuing to attract capital. So specifically for agriculture, we have different types of challenges. Hardware, I think, is the most straightforward, specifically drones. So right now we have 2 competing technologies. We all know about electric and gasoline. Battery-related drones, especially when it comes to pesticide or spraying applications, have a payload issue. So you can imagine, right, using an electric battery, you have a payload issue. Right now you're using 10-liter tanks, but they're increasing in terms of size. As the tanks get bigger, right, your payload issues also have different regulatory issues when you increase your payload. But for agriculture, right, it really has a drag on the battery life. gasoline is often a much preferred, or can be a preferred use here. When it comes to surveying, imaging type work, battery is definitely very effective. You have different types of drones. You have quadcopter drones, you have fixed wing drones as well being used for different applications. Sensors for imaging, sensors for positioning, stabilization, constantly evolving and moving forward at a very, very quick pace. So now you have multispectral imaging applications where you can capture a lot of information and it can be fed back to the farmers in almost real time, depending on how good your connection is. We'll come to that in a moment. And then of course we have spray technologies, which are also a big issue. So it changes the way pesticides need to be sprayed, the things that need to be taken into account. So if you're flying a drone, you can imagine, for example, that you're going to have a spray vortex. It's going to be different from on-land spray. Just understanding wind, understanding the height that the drone is flying to the plants. These are all going to be things that are going to be impacting spray rates, how quickly it needs to be sprayed, and then also the formulations are changing. So there's a lot of things that are happening just on the hardware side to make it applicable, but it's moving very quickly. Infrastructure, another big challenge. You can imagine that if you have rural applications, having an internet connection might not necessarily always be feasible. So if you're doing any type of imaging that is cloud-based, the information that you're capturing needs to be put into a cloud, and that's the common way that it's going right now. If you don't have that connection, then you can't really do it. So internet availability or connection availability in rural areas across the world, this is not an emerging market or Southeast Asia issue. This is in the United States as much an issue as it is anywhere else, that people are working on in order to ensure that you have on-demand image outputs. Other big issue from an infrastructure standpoint of view is going to be the data platforms and the analytics tools. So today the information that you can capture is very powerful. Analyzing the information though is still an issue. So you think about a farmer receiving 5 different pictures, saying, you know, this is the pictures we took, what does it mean? Is roughly how it's working today. Understanding what that information actually means, having a platform that can provide on-demand analytical output and being very proactive in helping the farmer understand what the issues are and what they can do about it is really that next step that's going to be taking place from an analytics standpoint of view to ensure that the output is also being used as best as possible. I would say overall though, it's the regulations. This is really the aspect that is lagging, and some governments are faster than other governments, but you really see third-party insurance is an issue. So how do you quantify risk for drone flights? Different flights, in city, out city, different applications, imaging versus, for example, pesticide spraying. All of these have different risks, right? Licensing, if you're doing spraying, what kind of license do you perhaps need versus if you're doing imaging? Are you flying close to construction sites or big buildings? But there's a lot of issues that are going into, need to be taken into account to understand how to best quantify risk and really provide insurance. Is it a hazard-based insurance policy that's being used? What are the limitations versus are we using artificial intelligence to have the drones make decisions when something happens to avoid an accident? What can be done? So insurance, very interesting topic for them on how drones are really going to be used and implemented. Talk briefly about beyond vision line of sight. This is really when it becomes autonomous, and this is really going to be how are drones integrated into the national airspace. So right now, most countries regulate airspace above 500 meters. And so you have this space below 500 meters roughly, which is open and unregulated. And right now, no country, well, one show has started to offer autonomous flights. But most countries haven't figured out how they want to regulate the low altitude flight in city, out of city. So this is going to be really moving very quickly. There's a lot of startups in this space that are pushing towards unmanned traffic management solutions that are popping up and also receiving a lot of money. You have pilot licensing, obviously, right? How to regulate, how to insure, just like driving a car, what do you need to do? There's no one size fits all right now. Drone companies are working together with different companies in their own countries to figure out how to work on the licensing aspects. You have information and data ownership. So the amount of information that you can now capture by flying a drone, it's not regulated. Right? And what that really means is it being processed and put into a cloud. Who owns that information? Right? As a citizen, if I walk down the street, do I have a right to say I don't want to be captured by a drone? I remember when Google started mapping everything in different countries, there was a lot or some issues with people saying they didn't want to be captured in Google Maps. What happens when we start doing this with drones everywhere? Geofencing is how to ensure that there are no-fly zones, so close to airports, for example, that restrict access. If new restrictions are implemented by the government, how do drones get updated? Is this a cloud-based update? How do you manage new restriction areas for drones not to be able to fly into? And then finally, and perhaps the least talked about, not only in autonomous vehicles, but also very before drones, is remote interference and spoofing, or what you also know as hacking. So drones can be hacked, and exactly how we're going to deal with that and what type of security requirements are needed in order to at least minimize hacking risk haven't been sorted out yet. And this is definitely one of those things that not very many people, or perhaps the media, is not engaging as much as they should, because this is going to be one of the biggest bottlenecks, just as much as for autonomous vehicles. It's really the hacking and the cybersecurity issue. Just to give you an idea of some of the very recent aspects that have been changing moving forward to deal with some of the challenges. Drone Deploy has now just launched a tool that enables low altitude imaging without an internet connection and basically on-demand output. So this is really new because now you no longer need an internet connection. I'm not quite sure if it's going through a Bluetooth application or if you have a chip on the drone that you take out afterwards to get that image. But at the end of the day, they're moving away from trying to solve the connectivity issue, and that's definitely a big move forward in terms of getting on-demand output for agriculture applications, or for that case, any application where you don't have an internet connection. This one, in May this year, I believe it was, Aerobotics, a drone company out of Israel, and Israel was the first country to officially allow and authorize fully unmanned autonomous drone flights in their airspace. So it's happening, right? It's everybody's watching, or not everybody, but a lot of people are watching, but it's happening. It's the first one that's allowing autonomous flight for commercial applications. There's a lot of insurers obviously watching to see how that's going to be managed. A lot of companies trying to understand how, as the drone volume increases, how they're actually going to be able to manage the number of missions that are being flown. Interesting for the insurance industry, Verifly, there are a few other companies, Flock in the UK is one. They're offering on-demand drone insurance. So now, as a visual line of sight application or limitation, if you have an app, you can basically receive on-demand insurance for any flight for a specific amount of time, as long as your drone, right, stays within the visual line of sight radius. They will basically insure you almost any time. Quite interesting, and it's being backed by large insurance companies. So for Flock, it's being backed by Allianz, which is quite interesting. I think Verifly received roughly $5 million in seed investment to push their platform forward. And then finally, also important for agriculture, is that you have, right, these are basically the top 5 image sensor companies that are really moving it forward, and they're using their capabilities to provide multi-spectral imaging and calibrate it so you can have time series analytics analysis. That really means that they're putting together a platform that enables them to take pictures over different time periods, and the back-end software will be able to analyze the output and understand how the images have changed over time. So this is really where it gets into really having a very powerful software-based analytics tool to analyze pictures and understand what is happening. And this is where a lot of companies are going into to understand what the business opportunity is, because for the first time so much more images are being captured, but there's no tools to really analyze the images. And so it's this analytics aspect of image analysis and output analysis of that that's really going to make the drone industry interesting and push it forward from a business model standpoint. If we think about the landscape for drone manufacturing, you can basically divide it into two areas. You will have hardware being dominated by manufacturers out of China, the big one in the industry being DJI, but you also have X-Aircraft. Yamaha from Japan actually started offering gasoline-based drones in the 80s already, but you have a lot of Chinese companies, primarily from the Pearl River Delta, that are very dominant in the hardware manufacturing side. And then as you move forward into the software, or to the other side of the software, sensors, data analytics, this area, you have a lot more service providers coming from Europe and from the United States that are looking to provide platforms, analysis of what's actually being captured. Now this picture is starting to merge. You have companies dropping out. DJI has made a big push into the data analytics area, so they've set up business units in order to actually try and understand what to do with all the information that they're capturing. So roughly in 6 months, this picture could be completely different, or much different than it is today. But you still have a fairly strong split between hardware and software. The next slides talk more specifically about agriculture. We were specifically interested in agriculture because we feel that agriculture is going to be one of the industries where adoption is the quickest and opportunity for adoption is very prevalent. And so some of the things that we looked at first was really to understand, in an agricultural setting, how have drones been deployed and which countries have been the early adopters. And so Japan has actually been adopting and using drones as early as the 1980s, when Yamaha first started producing a copter drone, gasoline-based, and they were doing pesticide or spray applications. In the United States, you've seen the adoption of what we would call aerial tools. So a lot of planes being used, later satellites obviously, but they're using planes to spray, for example. So you've seen the adoption of aerial tools quite a lot. What we noticed, and what was important for our analysis moving forward, was that the driver of adoption in the United States versus Japan was actually quite different. In the United States, you had a lot of large farms, and so servicing these farms requires a different business model than, for example, in Japan. In Japan, you face an aging population, labor shortage, and drones started being used actually for labor alleviation issues. Basically, people are getting too old to spray manually in small rice paddies. And this has been really one of the key issues why we saw the adoption in Japan so early already. When we looked at where they were being applied, you could actually see that across the board it can be used anywhere. Right? You have small, scattered, irregular plots of land, which are very interesting for drone applications. Right? If there's some machinery being used, but you have manual labor, especially when it comes to spray applications, now also seeding applications. But then on the other side, sorry?
Do you want us to wait with questions to the end, or
if you want to jump in, please.
Marcus, I wanted to ask, when you looked at
Yep.
what happened in Japan and in the US,
Yep.
do you find that the agricultural businesses or farmers actually buy drones, or is there service providers in between that buy from manufacturers?
Very good question. I think that's the one that everybody wants to know. Service providers. A Yamaha drone today is going to cost you about US dollars 100,000. And so what we've seen is that there are independent service providers in Japan that actually either own or lease the drone, and Yamaha is just a manufacturer, and then these service providers are providing the spray service. So Yamaha started, and it wasn't really an imaging aspect. They weren't really interested in precision agriculture as you would know it today. So it was really, right, basic or pragmatic in terms of applications for labor alleviation. Too many old people, not enough people to spray, right? We can figure out how to do this with a drone. And so it was fairly simple at the beginning, radio controlled, team of people, and then manually done. And so that was the business model that was rolled out over Japan, going through service providers primarily. Okay. Some numbers, these obviously aren't ours, we don't have this level of reach, but it just gives you an idea of where the opportunity is for drones. So if you look at the left-hand side, it's really about drones coming in where you have small plots of land. So on the right-hand side, you see at the bottom hectares, and then you see the costs that go up on. And then obviously as the farm size gets bigger, right, it becomes much more expensive to be flying drones from an application standpoint of view. But then as the plot size gets smaller, drones are much more economical. And this is where you see actually that drones are not necessarily disrupting, but they're opening up a new market that wasn't there previously. So for example, if you're a CropScience company, all of a sudden you might have access to much smaller farms, or might be able to provide a service to much smaller farms, which were previously not on your radar. If you are an equipment provider, same idea. So previously where mechanization was quite low, there's starting to be an evolving or developing opportunity to provide drone services to increase, in this case, mechanization, but as a service. And so this is really where you see that opportunity that's coming and pushing forward. The other opportunity and the other advantage, of course, is that drones can be flown much more frequently. Right? You don't have to wait for the satellite to come and take a picture, and if it's cloudy, who knows. But you can basically, if you have one, you can fly it every day. Obviously, there's aspects to ownership and whether or not you have that, but it's quite interesting to see that the flexibility of drones is very high, and the application is quite flexible. We took a look at crop science players because we felt that the biggest impact that drones were going to have, on the previous slide, it talks about the reduction of pesticides as one of the key advantages of using drones. Obviously, then from a crop science player point of view, if all of a sudden, right, we require less pesticides, that means that they're going to have to rethink their business model, which has previously really been about bulk spraying. Right? As long as I get enough on the field, then I can kill everything and make sure the plants survive. Whereas now we're moving forward, really reducing the amount of pesticide that goes onto a field, that this is going to have a big impact on their business. So understanding how they can continue to capture value and understand what they're doing in this space was quite interesting for us. So we mapped this out primarily based on what's available in the public space. And so in part, Dow DuPont perhaps has a better, I guess you would call, internal PR agency or marketing department that is pushing more information out. However, we have been in contact with Dow DuPont, and we know that they're very aggressive in China, for example, in terms of the cooperations that they have going with the different public institutions, the universities, as well as the number of drones that they're actually testing. So when it comes to spray applications, right, understanding which drones are actually being used in the field, understanding who's applying them, which service providers are using them, is quite important. So they have been very, very active, and our understanding is that they've been more active than the other players around BASF or Bayer, which are active, but Bayer, for example, has been quite strong on the imaging and analysis point, where they've been looking to integrate and go the digital farming route, less so on just focusing, or the level of focus on drones alone. So we haven't presented this to any of the CropScience players yet, so if anyone has insights, please feel free to share. But the idea is to just get an idea of who's moving forward, and then who's not really doing much, or where don't we hear, at least, from companies that are getting involved in this space. As a final step, what we tried to do is to really map out and understand what is the level of adoption for aerial tools. There's no one statistical database to be able to put this together for you. So this is really coming from interviews and multiple sources to really just try and understand what the level of aerial adoption. So aerial adoption can be helicopters, it could be drones, it could be planes, but really just trying to understand how much is being applied across different countries in Asia. So we look specifically at China, less than 2%. It's really, there's not much history in terms of aerial tool adoption. South Korea, Thailand, the Philippines, basically all ranging around 15% and less in terms of the adoption of aerial agricultural tools. Understanding and taking a look at this, we wanted to model and start mapping out what are going to be the key drivers of drone adoption, and what's going to be the model of drone adoption in agriculture. So what we came up with were the 5 pillars. Fairly straightforward. We think about the regulatory environment, what's being done, sophistication, development of regulations for the adoption. Think about the crop value opportunity. So what we've seen from our research is obviously where you have high value crops, there's much more interest in using drones. We've seen the productivity challenge, especially in Japan, where you have older people, you have less young people willing to engage in agriculture. Then you have the existing aerial adoption. So how is that impacting adoption of new aerial tools? And then the potential for precision agriculture. And so we mapped these 5 points across and came up with this map for the US. And you can see that it's very heavy on the precision agricultural level, crop value as well. In comparison, if you map that against Japan, what you see is that it's different in terms of the key drivers for adoption. Here, in comparison to the United States and in comparison to many countries, you see it's a productivity challenge. It's a labor resource challenge. So it's quite basic. They've been using these tools for quite a while already. They have a fairly structured regulatory environment in terms of how it needs to be used. And the crop value hasn't really played as big a role in the adoption. So mapping it, you get a different pattern on the map. Now if we apply the framework to other countries, you start to see that the pattern emerges that we get a very strong skew towards productivity challenge much more than other key pillars. So for China, we think about Thailand, again, crop value a little bit higher, but productivity challenge remains to be the key. Can we do it in the Philippines? Again, productivity challenge being key. And then finally in Korea, again. And so the output after the mapping exercise and the conclusion that we've come to is that we would see an adoption model that starts to mirror much more the Japanese adoption model. So specifically what that would mean is that we don't expect to see a push towards precision agricultural adoption first. What we expect to see is really basic adoption of simple tools, simple spraying tools, visual line of sight applications as a first step, and for reasons of labor alleviation and also worker safety. So these are really going to be the main drivers that we would expect in these countries, and that would be a different model than, for example, what we would see in the United States, where it's really pushing towards precision agriculture. Finally, a few pictures, just to give you an idea. We've had a chance to visit exhibitions in China specifically, and so you can have a fairly sophisticated tool on your left-hand side, but then to show you what else is being offered in the market, this is basically a drone, and in the middle what you have is a jar. If you've been to China, they use peanut oil or they have some kind of oil, right? That's all that is, and it's stuck in the middle, and it's a very basic drone. If it falls out of the sky, you can probably fix it yourself. And these people are going to these exhibitions and they're providing these products, trying to sell them. And it's a very robust and very simple tool compared to what you see on the left-hand side. So just understanding the range of technologies that are already available in the market and what, to a certain extent, is being applied is quite interesting. And I kid you not, right? These are really people that are going to showcase their products on the exhibition. Other things, getting away from spray, so you have seeding. So 2 years ago, nobody was talking about seeding applications. So that's really come up quite quickly. It wasn't on the radar. People are doing market sizing to figure out the value of the market. Pretty sure they haven't figured out what the opportunity is for seeding applications. Quadcopters in China specifically, battery-based, is what's being used quite often and what's being used. DJI model, it's quite common if you see it. And finally, looking at it from another aspect is the imaging side and what's being used. So fixed wing aircraft that are being used to do different levels of imaging as well. So this just gives you an idea of the different applications and the different types of drones that are in the market that are also being used today. And finally, this is really just to leave you with a thought if you're not convinced that drones are going to be coming. What we did is we plotted the arable land of the different countries, and then we looked at how much is actually used for rice, and we looked at the adoption rate of the different countries in rice. So you can see Japan, which doesn't have a lot of land, has a very high adoption rate. Is it working? No. At the top. Now if you look at the other countries, for example China, look at the size of the bubble, then we think about how much is being used just for rice. It's roughly 50%. And then look at what the adoption rate is, it's quite low. So even if we're just looking at an increase in, 25%, you can imagine just the level of opportunity, and this is just talking about rice paddies. Of course, if we think about South Korea, Thailand, or even the Philippines, that we have very low adoption rates here compared to Japan, and that gap is quite high. And we really know that for the crop science companies, it's a very interesting technology from a pesticide spray standpoint of view. For the insurance companies, it's a very interesting technology because it enables them to have a much better understanding of what's happening in the fields. There's a lot of people that are very interested. So instead of putting a number on it, we put a chart around it, and I hope that this gives you an idea of just the level of opportunity if we narrow it down to rice paddies. Okay, that's all for me. I want to take questions. If not, we'll move forward. We do have a paper if you'd like to download it. It's free on our website. It also talks a lot about what I just shared today. And yeah.
I have one question.
Yes, please.
You're putting applications. How expansion of applications will be done? You include the coverage, spraying, seeding. Mm-hmm. Do you also have sonic application? Suppose the drone will move above the farm, putting the sonic sounds to remove insects. Instead of killing, sound is not friendly to the insects, they will go away without killing. And there is a time before they will be coming back 1 day, 2 days, then drone can fly again. Especially on the sleeping time of the insects.
Yeah.
This is the new way of organic farming, and they are adopting this.
I have not heard of sonic applications.
Instead of
for drones.
spraying
Yeah.
insecticides that will be absorbed in the
Yeah.
grains, right?
Yeah.
Or the food or the crop. This way, it is organic without absorbing any pesticides.
Understand. I have not heard of sonic applications for drones. I think one of the challenges that you might have is the frequency of flight, or frequency of missions. If you have to have the drone up every day or every 2 days, and the level of coverage that it needs to have. So I'm not really sure. I haven't heard in this space anything about sonic applications for drones. So
You can see the small application to the biggest one. In
Yep.
this room, if you put one instrument of having the sonic,
mm-hmm.
you'll not hear that voice or the
Yeah.
sound. But insect will hear and they will go away without killing them.
Yeah.
So similar way, the crop which is very sweet,
Mm-hmm.
attracting insects.
Mm-hmm.
They are not making their own food. God has made the food for the crop,
Yeah.
through the crop.
Yeah.
So instead of killing them,
Mm-hmm.
moving them away from the ripe crop,
Yeah.
ripe fruits, maybe orchard, maybe crop, maybe
Yeah. What's the frequency of application for something like that? How often do you have to apply this sonic?
applications. I do not know, but there is a way.
Yeah.
If the insect do not find a friendly place to stay,
Yeah.
inhabitants will not be there. They will go away permanently to
Yeah.
find another place to live in.
Yeah.
I think it's complementing what Markus asked you,
Yeah.
but because those kind of sonar you need constant,
Mm-hmm.
so you need to fly the drone like.
Now there is a question by the Prime Minister of Thailand. You are making organic rice, whether you have high cost organic rice market or not.
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 days there was a question by.
Mm-hmm.
So this will increase the cost, but it will make health, longevity of the people in the world higher.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, again, it might just come down to the frequency of the application.
It may
So,
be crazy.
Right now, it's quite expensive for farmers to own their own drones. So we talked shortly about the business model, and what we see is more in the direction of service providers providing one-off or infrequent services.
You have very nicely included one word, that high cost
Yeah,
output items they can include in the funds.
yeah. So, yeah, interesting. I haven't heard if anybody else has heard about sonic applications
Yeah.
of drones.
Maybe
Yeah.
if you put loudspeakers on the ground,
Yeah,
even if
yeah,
you
yeah.
put
Yeah,
on the
you
ground,
don't need
right?
to
have
the drone,
Ground-based
yeah.
loudspeakers wouldn't be very expensive.
I think, I'm not aware, I haven't heard of it from a drone application standpoint.
Input to output, they are not spending anything outside the chemical like you use a peanut oil. Nothing to be spent, only electricity consumption is there or the
Mhm.
client time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Innovations coming in.
Yeah. Maybe you could be the first.
Right, I think we can have another Q&A session after we finish our
Okay.
presentation.
Okay,
Yes.
continue.
So, alright, we'll just bring you to a little bit to this area where we talk about Indochina. Not like Markus, who's passionate about drones. I'm passionate a little bit more about tractors, farmers, fertilizers. So I will just walk you through what's going on in this region, how actually agriculture has been done here, what is the development, and then we also talk a little bit about how we think drone will be adopted in this region. Well, we'll start a little bit about how important is agribusiness in this region. So, like currently we have about 14% of 5 country GDP together accounted from agricultural. It's about 97 billion US dollars, so it's a immense GDP contribution to every countries. You see, Myanmar currently is about 1/3 of their GDP from agriculture, which means that there are a lot of people who's actually in the agricultural business. So, well, we have Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. It's actually quite in the good high as well. But Thailand has been moving towards service GDP as well as industrial in the past decades. So we see a little bit less contribution from Thailand, but you look at the number of GDP, it's still huge. What we see in the next 5 years, in 2020, we see that the contribution still remain almost the same, a little bit increased by 15%. But you see the value is actually going up to 125 billion US dollars. So again, it's still very large demand and then the contribution. The rest of the country would likely to be a little bit less contribution from agricultural, but you see Myanmar is actually going up to 34%. So because Myanmar is just opening up the country, farmers just get more knowledgeable, they do farm more proper. So we are expecting Myanmar would be a little bit more developing, and then they contribute more into Indochina GDP in terms of agribusiness. Well, we talk about, then what about the global? How Indochina actually important to the global agribusiness? So we talk about the first crop, which is sugarcane. You see that Thailand only account for 7% of sugarcane production across the world. And then 2% actually from CLMV. CLMV stands for Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and then Vietnam. Like 9%, okay, good. Then what about rice? You see that Thailand account for 4% of the rice production across the world. The rest, 11%, you see Vietnam is one of the top export rice in the world. Then we have Myanmar, who are actually producing a lot of rice in the past 5 years. Cambodia is also making a good rice. Laos a little bit less, but still. Cassava, you see the numbers actually up to 20%. Cassava contribution from this region to the global. So we talk about 1/3 of cassava production from the world is actually from this region. Last but not the least, we talk about like 47% of natural lumber from this region. So Thailand only is about 36%. Another country would be Malaysia, who you will know that it's actually top exporter of natural lubbers. So we see that ASEAN itself, or Indochina specifically, contribute a lot to global agribusiness. Then we see what's going on in the past 5 to 7 years about in terms of cultivated area in Indochina. So we see that the cultivated area is actually increasing every year, like 2.2% on the average. You see that every country is actually increasing. Vietnam is actually increasing because people have more tractors to be able to go into the other area that's not yet cultivated, but then they made it cultivated. Land preparation. Myanmar is slightly less compared to other countries because of the geographical coverage. Actually, a lot of mountains, a lot of area that is not cultivated, as well as the monsoon season and all. So we see that overall trend, we still see the cultivated areas still going up in this region. So what has been planted in this region? So we put a little bit of heat map here, where in Thailand, as we know that northeast region is the top cultivated area in terms of rice. We go to Vietnam, Mekong Delta, the bottom part of the region is actually one of the highest cultivated area. In Cambodia, it's the same, where we have the Phnom Penh area and another region where Mekong region actually passed through. Laos is a little bit focused on south because it's a landlocked country. There's no way out to the seas, and then so the cultivation area in Laos is a little bit toward the south. Myanmar, you see that there are a lot of cultivating area has been done in the north as well as central. So we see that there are a lot of areas here where we can do the cultivation. The second point I would like to walk you through is about how actually this area developed the agricultural business, agricultural process. One thing that we learn is about, we have to understand what is the key drivers in this region. So first and foremost, drivers in this region is government initiative. Because all 5 countries are still developing countries, and when they want to develop something, it needs a lot of push from government. You see that Thailand has been pushing a lot in the past decades, like the light pitching scheme and so on. We've been there already, but then you see Myanmar in the past 5 years, we see a lot of movement from Myanmar government. They partner with Indian government, they partner with Korean government in terms of getting people access to tractor more. As not only tractor itself, it's about pesticide, insecticide, fertilizers, where the Myanmar government actually try to help farmers educate more and then using more high technology kind of will. So we think that is a top priority in terms of how to drive the agribusiness forward in this region. The second one is about, as we see in Thailand, that people are actually moving away from agricultural. There are a lot of people in rural area actually moving into the city, doing more services, doing more industrial, which means what? Which means that we have less labor in agricultural. And then they have to find something that actually keep their production and their productivities moving on, which means that the better technology, better equipment, technology like drones will come in. But we'll see later on how things drones can be developed in this country. And then the last one is about the leading players in the market. Like we see a lot of, in this region, Japanese people like Uruguay, Myanmar has been dominate the market, but then we see a lot of people like CNHI, John Deere, who actually try to set their footprint in this region as well. So we see that those are the three key drivers that actually going to drive the overall demand of the market. And from the pesticide side, we see players like Bayer and Syngenta actually playing a good role in the market. In Thailand, farmers will have a lot of knowledge. They are already developed about, educated about how they do the good farming process, because we already been there for a while. But then in other regions, you can see that, mostly in Laos, there are people, farmers in Laos still less developed and less educated compared to other countries in this region. What about the barriers? So we're talking about how the market is going to grow, but what's actually hindering the market? So again, we're talking about farmers in this region who don't really have a high income, right? In Thailand, it's okay, people getting more, farmers getting more and more income from day to day. But then if you look at the Laos, I've been to Laos myself many times for the interacting with farmers. We see that the technology in Laos and the income of the farmer in Laos is still very low. So in order to adapt to new technology or getting buy tractors or buy good pesticide or insecticides, it will be a little bit difficult for them unless there are someone who subsidize or support them financially. So we think it's one of the key barriers of the market. The second one is that if we live in this region, you see that there are 2 years ago we have a flood situation, which we live in Bangkok, so we don't see a lot of impacts. But if you live in the rural area, in cultivated area, the flood comes, actually the whole season is gone. And then it's actually happening a lot in Myanmar, where they have a lot of monsoon season. In Cambodia, in the Mekong Delta River, who actually have a lot of flood every year. And talk about Laos, who is a landlocked, which they don't really have access to the waters. So that would be the second priority that we think is a key barrier of the market. And last but not the least is about knowledge of farmers, because farmers have to get educated when they use a new technology or use a new product. So as long as they don't get educated by government, company itself, or the friends or the influencer in the market, it's very difficult for them to actually adopt to the new technology or pay a little bit extra to get their product. So that would be the key barriers in the market. One thing that I think it's illustrate very well about how actually this country developed in the market. So we use one idea is called about tractor adoption, which we talk about how this country actually adopt tractor, the uses of tractor in these countries. So you can see that in Thailand is actually the top of the bar, where we've been adopting tractor a lot in the